In the year 1845, at the height of British naval power, the Royal Navy launched one of its most ambitious voyages of exploration. The place, England. The mission, to chart and finally navigate the elusive Northwest Passage, a mythical Arctic sea route that promised to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the frozen wilderness of northern Canada. It was a voyage destined to become one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. At the center of this mission were two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Both vessels were veterans of polar service, reinforced for icy waters, and equipped with state-of-the-art technology for the time. They were steam-assisted, with iron hulls and provisions calculated to last the crew for up to 3 years. The ships themselves were not just tools of exploration, they were symbols of British innovation, pride, and empire. On board were 129 men, hand-picked for their experience and discipline, led by the esteemed Sir John Franklin, an Arctic veteran and decorated naval officer with decades of service behind him. His reputation was both his strength and his burden, for the pressure of success weighed heavily on him and the crew who followed. They carried enough tinned food, coal, navigation charts, tools, and scientific equipment to sustain a multi-year expedition. The expedition included a library of over 1,000 books, scientific instruments for recording magnetic data, and even a small organ for music and morale. Their mission wasn't only about navigation. They were to record geography, climate, flora and fauna, and establish Britain's supremacy in Arctic discovery. In May of 1845, Erebus and Terror departed from Greenhithe, England. Spirits were high, and the public hailed Franklin and his men as national heroes. Families watched from the shore, waving farewell to husbands, brothers, and sons who would never return. By July, the expedition was sighted in Baffin Bay, near the entrance to Lancaster Sound. It was the last time any European would see them alive. Months passed. Then years. The ships never emerged from the ice. No word. No return. The Royal Navy eventually sent dozens of search expeditions, scouring the Arctic for any trace of Franklin and his men. What began as a scientific mission quickly transformed into a national obsession. In the absence of information, whispers began to grow. Had they been trapped in the ice? Had scurvy or starvation taken them? Or had something more terrifying happened in that frozen void? The Arctic, beautiful and merciless, held its secrets well. The first clue came years later, in 1850. Rescue missions discovered remnants of camps on Beechey Island, including 3 graves. They belonged to crew members who had died early in the voyage. The graves, preserved by permafrost, offered a grim window into the past. Autopsies on the exhumed bodies revealed high levels of lead poisoning, a potential result of poorly sealed tinned food or contaminated water systems. But the graves were just the beginning. In 1859, a search party led by Francis Leopold McClintock found a note hidden in a cairn on King William Island. It revealed that Erebus and Terror had become icebound in 1846 and were abandoned in 1848. Franklin had died in June 1847. The surviving 105 men had attempted to trek south on foot. That note was chilling enough. But what came next shocked the world. Inuit testimony and subsequent analysis suggested that some of the crew may have resorted to cannibalism in their final days. Disarticulated bones were found, bearing signs of deliberate cuts, a silent testimony to desperation beyond imagining. Imagine marching across an endless expanse of ice and snow, your comrades dying one by one, and the cold gnawing not only at your limbs but at your sanity. Imagine the moment when hunger outweighs horror. The myth of the Franklin expedition grew darker. Some speculated they had gone mad. Others believed they had been cursed. Stories spread of ghost ships drifting through the ice, haunted by the souls of the lost men. Some Inuits spoke of a large, dark ship appearing and disappearing in the fog, with lights that should not have burned and voices that did not sound human. As the years turned into decades, the Franklin story was no longer just history, it had become legend. For over a century and a half, the fate of Erebus and Terror remained one of history's coldest enigmas. Generations of explorers, archaeologists, and historians chased shadows across the tundra, piecing together a puzzle scattered over thousands of square miles. But in 2014, the wreck of HMS Erebus was found in the icy waters off King William Island. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered in a near-perfect state of preservation, resting quietly beneath the waves, as if it had simply waited for someone to return. The mystery was partially solved. But even with the ships discovered, questions linger. Why did they abandon the vessels when they still seemed seaworthy? Why did so many die so early in the expedition? What truly happened during their final march across the ice? Was it just starvation and cold, or did something far more terrifying grip them in their last days? The Franklin expedition began with bold ambition and unmatched preparation. It ended in silence, ice, and myth. And though the wrecks have been found, the full story may never surface. The Arctic holds its secrets in frozen silence, where time stands still and history refuses to thaw. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be remembered. Hold on, before we continue, I just want to say something. If you're working, studying, or getting ready to sleep, feel free to put this video on in the background and let the haunting stories of the deep unfold around. I just want to tell you, make sure subscribe and like show your support for our work. In the winter of 1872, a ghost glided across the Atlantic Ocean. It was silent, steady, eerily still, a brigantine with her sails partially set, bobbing gently on calm waters. The waves lapped softly against her hull, as if whispering secrets only the sea could know. No distress signal, no signs of struggle. Only silence. The time, December 5, 1872. The place, approximately 600 miles west of Portugal, in the Azores region of the Atlantic. The British merchant ship Dei Grazia spotted an unusual sight on the open sea, another vessel adrift, her movements unnatural, her presence unsettling. As they neared, the tension aboard the Dei Grazia thickened. There was something deeply wrong about what they were seeing. The ship was the Mary Celeste. She had departed New York City on November 7th, bound for Genoa, Italy. A solid merchant vessel, built in Nova Scotia in 1861, she had been renamed and refurbished over the years. She was 103 feet long, 282 tons, with a reputation for resilience. Her captain was Benjamin Briggs, a devout, respected seaman known for his sharp discipline and quiet strength. Aboard were his wife, Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, and a crew of 7 seasoned sailors. 10 souls, full of purpose, heading into open waters under favorable skies. The ship carried 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, not flammable, but dangerous if inhaled in quantity. Supplies were loaded to last for 6 months, including preserved meats, dry goods, and fresh water. Navigation instruments were calibrated. Charts marked. Everything was, on paper, routine. An ordinary journey. Nothing about the voyage should have spelled doom. Until she was found adrift. When the crew of the Dei Grazia boarded the Mary Celeste, what they discovered would haunt maritime history forever. The ship was in seaworthy condition. Her sails flapped lazily in the breeze. The wheels spun gently, untended. The hull was intact. The lifeboat, however, was gone. The last log entry was dated 10 days earlier, on November 25th. It made no mention of any trouble. No warnings. No final words. Inside the cabins, time had stopped. The crew's belongings were undisturbed. Pipes, boots, journals, left behind in an eerie tableau of abandonment. In the galley, food was neatly stored. The stove retained faint warmth. On the captain's desk lay Sarah's sheet music, untouched, waiting for fingers that would never play. The sewing machine held a half-stitched garment, needle frozen in place. A child's doll rested on a bunk, glass eyes staring into the void. But there was no one aboard. Not a single person. There were no signs of violence. No blood. No scuffle. No indications of piracy. The ship's papers and Captain Briggs' navigation tools were missing, along with the ship's only lifeboat. It was as if the entire crew had stepped off the deck in unison and vanished into thin air. Speculation ran wild. Some said it was a seaquake or waterspout that made the crew believe the ship was sinking, prompting a sudden evacuation. Others believed toxic fumes from the alcohol cargo may have leaked, causing hallucinations or panic. But if so, why didn't they return? The weather had been calm. The ship remained afloat. Logic broke down in the face of such absence. The more superstitious spoke of sea monsters or malevolent forces. Ghosts. Sirens. Ancient curses. Some believed the ship was cursed from the start, doomed by its name changes and unlucky history. Others whispered of mutiny, of dark intentions among the crew, or of murder covered in silence. The crew of the Dei Grazia were questioned and even briefly accused of foul play. But there was no evidence. Only a ship with its sails half set, drifting alone. What made the mystery so enduring was not just the disappearance. It was the stillness. This wasn't a wreck. This wasn't an act of war or weather. It was a perfect vessel, abandoned without reason. It was an absence so complete that it felt deliberate, as if the sea itself had reached up and claimed the crew, leaving no struggle, no sound, no explanation. The Mary Celeste was eventually brought into Gibraltar by the Dei Grazia crew, where a British Admiralty court opened an inquiry. They examined every inch of the ship. They heard every theory. They found no proof of violence, mutiny, or sabotage. In the end, they could offer no answer. The mystery was deeper than evidence. The ship was repaired, sold, and sailed again. But something lingered. Sailors whispered of strange sounds on board. Bad luck followed her through the years until she was finally run aground deliberately and destroyed for insurance in 1885. Captain Briggs, his wife and child, and the crew were never seen again. The sea, vast and unyielding, kept its secret. To this day, the fate of the Mary Celeste remains one of the most haunting unsolved maritime disappearances in history. A perfect vessel with no one left to sail it. A meal left uneaten. A song unsung. A journey that ended not in tragedy, but in mystery. No message in a bottle. No wreck. Just a ship with open doors, floating toward oblivion. And the question that still echoes across the waves. Why did they leave? In the late 1940s, somewhere in the shadowed waters of the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest and most treacherous maritime lanes in the world, a chilling SOS broke through the static of radio waves. The message was brief and terrifying. All officers, including Captain, dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. A pause. Then the final transmission. I die. Silence. The call came from a ship called the SS Orang Medan, allegedly a Dutch freighter. But to this day, there are no official records of its construction, ownership, or manifest. No port logs. No docking history. Nothing. In maritime registries, the ship is a ghost. Yet multiple merchant vessels operating in the region reported hearing the message. These weren't hallucinations. The signal was real. And one ship, an American vessel called the Silver Star, decided to investigate. They found the Orang Medan adrift in calm waters. No signs of distress on the outside, no damage to the hull, no lifeboats missing. Just a silent ship, drifting. Lifeless. When the boarding party stepped aboard, they expected a gas leak or perhaps a mutiny gone wrong. But what greeted them was something far worse. The crew was dead. Every last one of them. Bodies were sprawled across the decks and corridors, frozen in twisted poses of agony and terror. Their faces were contorted in wide-eyed fear, some with mouths open mid-scream. Several had their arms raised defensively, as if shielding themselves from something that wasn't there. Others clutched at their chests or gripped nearby railings with such force that their nails had broken off. The ship's dog was found dead too, fangs bared, spine arched. Even the animals had panicked before dying. There were no wounds. No blood. No sign of any physical violence. Just corpses and cold terror. Inside the radio room, the operator who sent the SOS sat slumped over his equipment, fingers still touching the Morse key. The machinery was undamaged, the room orderly. There was no evidence of struggle, only silence and death. The cargo hold was locked. Some reports claimed it carried sulfuric acid or hazardous chemicals. Others whispered about crates with unmarked contents, sealed tight by the military or private buyers. Rumors emerged that the ship had been transporting leftover nerve agents from the war, illegal under international law. Whatever the truth was, no one would ever verify it. Because shortly after the Silver Star crew attempted to secure a tow line, smoke began rising from deep within the Orang Medan's hold. Within minutes, fire engulfed the ship. Then, an explosion. A massive blast tore through the hull, sending the vessel to the bottom of the sea in a fiery descent. The Orang Medan was gone before investigators could arrive. No wreck has ever been found. No survivors. No documentation. The ship simply ceased to exist. Theories abound: chemical leaks, carbon monoxide poisoning, black market weaponry. But none explain the expressions of raw, primal terror etched into the faces of the dead. And then there are the darker whispers. Some say the Orang Medan was cursed, that it carried a relic dredged from an ancient ruin, never meant to see the light. Others believe the crew encountered something beyond explanation, an apparition, a force, or a sound that shattered their sanity before killing them. The governments involved never released official statements. Any reports, if they exist, were buried or classified. And so, the Orang Medan remains one of the most unnerving nautical legends of all time. A phantom ship. A deadly message. A vanished wreck. A story half told by the sea, and finished only in silence. Because some ships vanish. And some leave behind a scream. In March of 1918, at the height of World War I, the United States Navy relied heavily on its fleet of colliers, massive ships designed to transport coal and ore, to fuel the war effort. Among these giants was the USS Cyclops, the largest and most advanced vessel of her kind. At over 540 feet long and weighing more than 19,000 tons when fully loaded, she was a floating fortress of steel and American industry. The ship had already served with distinction in previous missions across the Atlantic. But her final voyage would become one of the most haunting maritime disappearances in naval history, a vanishing so total, so utterly devoid of clues, that it still baffles historians and sailors more than a century later. The year was 1918. The place, the Western Atlantic, near the Bermuda Triangle, a region that, in time, would become infamous for inexplicable vanishings. The mission: deliver 10,800 tons of manganese ore, a key ingredient in wartime steel production, from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to Baltimore, Maryland. Aboard the Cyclops were 306 people, a mix of seasoned Navy crew, merchant sailors, engineers, and a handful of civilians, all under the command of Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley. The cargo was heavy, the sea routes long, but the ship had made similar journeys before. On paper, it was routine. But this voyage was anything but. From the outset, oddities began to mount. In Rio, Cyclops had lingered longer than expected. Some reports suggested that the ship had issues with her engines. Others mentioned a strange reshuffling of cargo and crew assignments, decisions made directly by Captain Worley, whose behavior had already drawn concern from his officers. By the time Cyclops left Rio in mid-February, the mood on board had reportedly shifted. Tension grew. Some accounts from men who disembarked early in the journey hinted at Captain Worley's growing paranoia and authoritarian command style. He was a strict man, known for wandering the deck in slippers and a long coat, reportedly carrying a sidearm. Others believed he harbored sympathies for the German Empire, having been born in Germany himself. These rumors were never confirmed, but they added fuel to speculation when things turned grim. The ship made a final stop in Barbados on March 3, 1918. She took on more coal, and several crew members were reportedly denied shore leave for unknown reasons. In Barbados, she sent her last known communication, a standard report. There was no mention of distress, no warnings. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then she sailed into open water. And vanished. There were no distress calls. No reports of enemy submarines. No severe storms in the area. Cyclops simply disappeared without a trace, somewhere between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay. When the ship failed to arrive in Baltimore, the Navy launched an urgent search. Days turned into weeks. Patrols combed the Atlantic. Nearby vessels were questioned. Allied communication lines buzzed with inquiries. Nothing. Not a single lifeboat. Not one fragment of cargo. No oil slick. No debris. The Navy was baffled. And then came the theories. Some believed the ship had suffered a sudden structural failure, that her overloaded cargo of dense manganese ore had caused her to break apart and sink instantly. But the Cyclops was designed to carry heavy loads. Others speculated about an underwater mine, perhaps left by a German U-boat, though no enemy submarines were ever confirmed in the area. And then came the more chilling stories. Whispers that the ship had entered a zone of silence, a pocket of ocean where compasses failed, and radios died. Survivors from nearby ships told of hearing nothing, no signal, no echo, only the vast, unnatural stillness that surrounded that stretch of sea. Some seafarers believed the Cyclops had stumbled into a storm of time, a magnetic anomaly that twisted navigation and swallowed ships whole. They spoke of strange lights seen on the horizon, flickering for hours, then disappearing. Other ships that passed through the same area later reported malfunctioning compasses, strange static on radios, and a deep, pressure-like weight in the atmosphere, as if the ocean itself were watching. But perhaps the most terrifying part of the story is what came after. Two of the Cyclops' sister ships, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus, vanished in almost identical circumstances in 1941, carrying the same cargo, traveling the same route, disappearing without distress calls. Same build. Same design. Same fate. All three lost in the same watery grave with no explanation. The USS Cyclops became more than a mystery. It became a naval ghost story. Was it sabotage? A mutiny? A freak seaquake? A magnetic anomaly in the deep? Or did something ancient and unknown, something vast, reach up from beneath and take her? To this day, not a single piece of the Cyclops has ever been recovered. The ship, the crew, and the thousands of tons of cargo simply ceased to exist. She remains, even now, the largest non-combat loss of life in the history of the U.S. Navy. And the ocean remains quiet. Waiting. Because in the Bermuda Triangle, not everything that disappears is lost. Some things are taken. In the biting autumn of 1775, the British whaling vessel Herald was navigating the treacherous waters west of Greenland. The wind howled like a warning through the rigging, and sheets of fog clung low over the sea like the breath of some ancient beast. Ice floes groaned beneath the ship's hull, and every creak of timber echoed into the stillness like the sound of bones shifting. The crew had braved the Arctic before. They were seasoned, alert, and hardened by cold. But nothing had prepared them for what emerged through that frozen veil of mist. A ghostly silhouette. A three-masted ship, drifting, lifeless but intact. It didn't move with the tide. It didn't signal. It didn't creak or sway like a vessel alive with crew. It just hovered, as though it had been waiting. Its name, barely legible beneath layers of frost and time, was Octavius. The captain of the Herald, confused but curious, ordered his men to approach. As their small boarding party rode through the icy slush, an eerie silence fell over them. No gulls cried. No water lapped. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath. They climbed aboard. The sails, though torn, were still rigged. Ropes hung stiff as iron. The deck was layered in frozen snow, and frost glittered on every rail. Yet the ship showed no signs of damage. No splintering. No evidence of conflict or abandonment. Then they went below deck. What they found there would never leave them. The interior was silent, deathly so. Every corridor seemed suspended in time. In the crew quarters, men were still in their hammocks, frozen in mid-rest. Some sat at tables, heads bowed as though in sleep. A few were huddled in corners, expressions twisted in fear or resignation. But it was in the captain's quarters that the mystery turned from chilling to unforgettable. There he sat, at his desk. Upright. Frozen solid. His hand still held a quill, the ink on the paper before him now long faded. His eyes, wide and pale, stared through the frost as if witnessing something no living man should see. Beside him were two smaller bodies. One was a woman, wrapped in shawls, her hands stiff over her heart. The other, a young boy, curled into the folds of a thick blanket, his face turned toward the wall. All three had died together. Not in panic, not in violence, but in absolute stillness, like statues carved from ice. The final entry in the captain's log was dated November 11, 1762. The Octavius had vanished from record 13 years earlier. She had left England bound for China by way of the newly theorized Northwest Passage, a perilous route threading through the Arctic, where maps failed and compasses lied. Many ships tried. Most never returned. Yet Octavius had apparently made it through. She had reached the Pacific, turned homeward, and somehow, without crew, guidance, or life, drifted all the way back to the eastern Atlantic. A journey of over 1,500 nautical miles, in silence. What had happened during those final days? Had the crew been trapped by an early freeze? Did they slowly succumb to the cold, one by one, as rations ran dry and darkness never lifted? Or had something else crept into that ship, something unseen and quiet, that froze not just flesh, but time itself? There were no signs of struggle. No sabotage. No lifeboats missing. No disease visible on the corpses. Only the ice, and that terrible stillness. The Herald's crew, deeply disturbed, took only the logbook before abandoning the ship. They feared the vessel cursed, or haunted, or worse, contagious. They rowed away in silence, leaving the Octavius to drift once more into the fog. She was never seen again. And so, Octavius became legend. Some claimed she was the first to ever complete the Northwest Passage, but at a terrible cost. Others said she had been claimed by a cursed native to those waters, a punishment for defying the boundaries of man and nature. Still others whispered that the ship had entered some kind of liminal space, frozen between time and death, never meant to be found. No official records confirm the ship's registry. No remains exist. Only the story. A tale passed from sailor to sailor, growing colder with every telling. A ship that sailed too far into the unknown, and came back only to remind us that some paths were never meant to be traveled. She did not crash. She did not burn. She simply stopped. And in that frozen silence, the sea offered a single, quiet message to those who dream too boldly. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some voyages should never return. It was the end of July, 1884. The air above the Labrador Sea was thick, not just with fog, but with the kind of weight you only feel when something isn't right. The sea had gone quiet, not calm, but watchful. The wind, usually biting and sharp in those northern reaches, had died down to a whisper. Even the gulls had fallen silent. The HMS Mallard, a Royal Navy gunboat, cut through the glassy surface of the ocean like a blade through cold oil. She was on routine patrol, but the mood aboard had grown still. Somewhere on the horizon, barely visible through the silver mist, was a ship. It wasn't moving. It wasn't signaling. It was just there. The time, July 29, 1884. The place, the Labrador Sea, between Newfoundland and Greenland, an expanse of water so cold it doesn't give back what it takes. The Mallard approached with caution. The ship's name became visible through the mist, SV Resolven. Her sails were still set, fluttering weakly in the lifeless breeze. No crew was visible. No flags. The wood along the hull was weathered but intact. She looked abandoned, but not wrecked. A boarding party was dispatched. As the first boots hit the deck of the Resolven, the men were struck by the stillness. Not just the absence of people, but the presence of something else. The air was wrong. Heavy. Thick with the feeling of having arrived just after something impossible had happened. Below deck, that feeling turned into dread. The galley was stocked. Loaves of bread sat wrapped in cloth on the table, not yet hardened. A pot of tea still rested on the stove. It had long gone cold, but hadn't been empty. There were cups, 2 of them, placed out neatly as if waiting for hands that never returned. The oil lamps still flickered in their casings. In the crew quarters, bunks were made. Some hastily, others perfectly neat, as if they had just stepped out for a moment. There were jackets hung, boots neatly paired at the end of each bed. In one locker, a seaman's journal lay open. The final page had been started, but never finished. The pen was still tucked in its spine. Even the ship's clock still ticked. Steady. Unbothered. Time had not stopped on the Resolven. But everything else had. The ship's cargo was untouched. The hull was pristine. There were no leaks, no signs of struggle, no smashed glass or scorched wood. No blood. Not even the faintest scent of rot or sickness. But the lifeboat, gone. 8 souls had sailed the Resolven. 7 crewmen. 1 unknown passenger. Their names, recorded in the harbor log at departure, would be the only thing left behind. None of them were ever seen again. Speculation began instantly. The simplest theory said they may have believed the ship was taking on water and fled. But the weather had been calm. The seas quiet. Even if they had panicked, why hadn't they returned? The ship was still perfectly seaworthy when it was found. No one who knew ships, especially not seasoned sailors, would have left her so easily. Unless they didn't leave by choice. Some whispered of fog too thick to breathe, laced with hallucinations. Others said the sea in that region had always been wrong. That some patches of ocean weren't natural. That the Labrador Sea, especially in summer, became a place where the veil between worlds thinned. Old mariners called it the Whispering Strait. They said you could hear voices in the fog, not cries for help, but calm, familiar voices, asking you to join them. Most dismissed these tales as superstition. But the men who boarded the Resolven never forgot that silence. The eerie cleanliness. The still burning lamps. And the ticking. There's something uniquely chilling about a ship that looks like it's still expecting its crew to return. Everything in place. Everything just waiting. But no one ever came back. The Resolven was towed to port and investigated. There were no clues. No evidence. No theories that held water. Just a name added to the long list of sea ghosts, drifting mysteries that swallowed their answers before the world could ask the questions. Eventually, the Resolven was scrubbed of her legend and refitted. Sold. Sailed again. But those who knew her name never forgot. They say if you sail the Labrador Sea in high fog, and you cut your engine, you can still hear the faint ticking of a clock that never stopped. And maybe, if you listen long enough, you'll hear footsteps on the deck. Coming up the stairs. In the warm, turquoise stretch of water known as the Coral Sea, just off the Queensland coast of Australia, something profoundly unsettling unfolded in April of 2007. It began like a dream. The Cas-2, a sleek, twin-hulled catamaran, set sail from eerily Beach under blue skies and good spirits. On board were 3 men, Derek Batten, 56, and brothers Peter and James Tunstead, 69 and 63. All were competent sailors. Not professionals, but certainly no amateurs. They weren't thrill-seekers or deep-sea risk-takers. They were retirees looking for a coastal escape, a leisurely cruise up toward Townsville, with short stops and long conversations along the way. They packed light. Fishing rods. Food. Cameras. One brought a laptop to journal the trip. They waved to bystanders at the dock, laughing, relaxed. It was the kind of departure that promised nothing but sunshine and calm water. 3 days later, a helicopter spotted the Cas-2 drifting aimlessly near the Great Barrier Reef. When the rescue team boarded her, what they found was the maritime equivalent of a paused film, a vessel frozen in midlife. The engine was idling. The GPS and radio were fully functional. A laptop sat open in the cabin. Plates of food were laid out untouched. A cup of coffee rested beside a pair of sunglasses. The cabin fan was still spinning. All 3 life jackets were neatly stored. The fishing line dangled off the back, still baited. And yet, the crew was gone. No signs of a struggle. No splashes of blood. No evidence of piracy, or theft, or mechanical failure. Just emptiness, in a place that should have been alive with conversation and wind chatter. The sails were slightly torn. One was unfastened and flapping loose. But the damage wasn't consistent with the storm. The weather had been mild. No squalls. No rogue waves reported in the area at the time. It made no sense. Investigators immediately ruled out piracy. Nothing was missing. All personal items remained. No ransom, no demands. The idea of the men going for a swim and being swept away was considered. But all 3? Without a single one managing to grab a life jacket or call for help. It didn't add up. The Cas-2's final GPS readings showed a smooth, uninterrupted course. The boat had slowed, but not erratically. There was no evidence of panic. The radio logs were clean. No distress signal had ever been sent. Forensic teams combed every inch of the vessel. A hat was found on the floor. A rope trailing in the water. Fingerprints everywhere, but only those of the three men. Some experts suggested a freak accident. One man falls overboard, and in the rush to save him, the others follow, leaving the catamaran ghosting alone. But they would have had to jump in without telling anyone, without grabbing flotation, and with no one ever managing to climb back aboard. And how likely is that, when the boat was built with ladders specifically designed for easy reboarding? Others noted that the boat had an automatic man-overboard system. It had never been triggered. Family members rejected the accident theory entirely. They knew these men. They were cautious, methodical, and most important, they would not all have left the boat, especially not together. Then the wilder theories began. Did they encounter something unnatural? Did they witness something they shouldn't have? Was there an intruder that left no trace? The most chilling part? No one ever found a single body. They didn't wash ashore. They weren't discovered later by fishing vessels or coastal patrol. They simply vanished. No bodies. No signals. No struggle. Just 3 lives deleted from existence, on a sunny afternoon, in a peaceful part of the world. The Kes-2 was towed back to shore and locked away for investigation. But nothing new emerged. No confession. No second look that turned up a missing clue. Today, the Kes-2 sits at the heart of modern maritime lore. A real case. A recent case. And still, completely unsolved. What happened on that boat? Did something pull those men off? Did something lure them away? Or did the sea claim them so quietly that even the wind forgot to notice? One thing's for sure, the ocean doesn't need violence to disappear people. Sometimes, all it needs is a little silence. And the rest, it keeps for itself. It was the summer of 1750. The sky over Newport, Rhode Island glowed in soft amber as dawn broke over the Atlantic. The water was calm, barely moving. The harbor, still drowsy from the night, began to stir with the sounds of early morning. Wooden docks creaked. Ropes swayed in a gentle breeze. The day, it seemed, would be uneventful. Then, just beyond the breakwater, a ship appeared. Small. Sleek. Familiar. She moved effortlessly through the still water, sails drawn, course steady, hull slicing the tide like she had a destination and no intention of missing it. But something about her felt off. No flags. No signal. No noise. Just the soft groan of wood against current. A dockhand noticed her first, wiping sleep from his eyes as the silhouette neared. He expected to hear shouts, orders, greetings. But there was only silence. And the ship kept coming. A white and green sloop. No crew in sight. No one at the helm. Just gliding forward, straight toward the dock, like she'd done it 100 times before. The name carved into her stern read, Sea Bird. She was well known. A merchant runner out of Boston. Cargo. Sometimes rumors of smuggling. Nothing unusual. Nothing feared. Until now. Men from the harbor ran to meet her. More out of instinct than alarm. Some grabbed ropes. Others waited for a call from the deck that never came. She touched the dock without resistance. No crash. No resistance. Just a faint bump, like a ship pulling in under the guidance of invisible hands. They boarded her. What they found would not make sense. The deck was clean. The sails were worn but functional. The wheel was tied off with perfect knots. No water in the hold. No damage to the hull. The ship was seaworthy. Maintained. But there was no one on board. Below deck, the silence deepened. The air still held the faint scent of burnt coffee. A kettle rested on a cold stove, undisturbed. The table was set with breakfast, pork, bread, half-sliced cheese. One plate had food still warm to the touch. No broken glass. No toppled chairs. No signs of panic or struggle. In the captain's quarters, a leather-bound journal sat open on a desk. The last line, written in a steady hand, read, "Winds favorable. We pass Block Island before dusk." The ink had dried. The pen was still resting beside the page. There had been 8 men aboard. Now, there was nothing. No lifeboat missing. No message. No bodies. No explanation. Just a ship that had sailed itself home. The story spread like fire. Newport wasn't large, and news like that doesn't stay tied down. People came to see it, this impossible vessel. Some said they'd spotted her before, further out to sea. A few swore they saw her in the moonlight 2 nights earlier, sails glowing, silent, drifting too fast for wind. And stranger still, some said they saw shadows on the deck. Moving. But not like men. Slow. Wrong. Theories filled the void the crew had left behind. Some blamed pirates, though none could explain why they'd leave valuables untouched and breakfast uneaten. Others said the crew had gone mad. Leapt into the sea. But the weather had been clear. The tides calm. No storm. No desperation. Then came the whispers. That the sea bird had once carried something she shouldn't have. A sealed box from an unregistered port. A symbol carved into the lid. Payment taken in coin too cold to hold. A name scratched into the manifest, then erased. That night, in taverns from Providence to Boston, the old mariners began to talk. They said the sea has rules. And they said the sea bird broke one. No one ever found the crew. No sign of them washed ashore. No bodies. No lifeboat discovered floating in the currents. It was as if the ocean had decided to take them, and only them. Some say the ship was burned. Cleansed. Others claimed she was sold and renamed, though anyone who boarded her afterwards spoke of strange things, doors opening on their own, footsteps at night, cargo shifting when the sea was still. One man, drunk, maybe lying, said he woke up during a storm and saw someone standing at the bow. A man in a long coat, soaked to the bone, facing the waves. He turned. But there was no face beneath the hood. That's what he said. No one believed him. But the dockhands still talk about the morning the sea bird came home. No crew. No sound. No reason. Just a perfect arrival. And no one left to explain it. Because the sea never gives up its secrets. It just returns what's left. In the frigid silence of Antarctica, where the sun barely rises and time seems to hang in the air like breath in the cold, a British whaling vessel named Hope made a discovery in the year 1840 that would echo across every dockside and sailor's tavern for centuries to come. They saw her first as a silhouette through the mist, a small schooner, battered but upright, half entombed in sea ice. Her sails were torn, frozen in mid-flutter like the final breath of a dying creature. The ship's name, barely visible beneath layers of frost and salt, read the Jenny. The ice creaked. The wind whispered. But the Jenny made no sound of her own. She had departed from Lima, Peru, 17 years earlier, in 1823, bound for England with a full cargo and a seasoned crew. It was meant to be a routine trade voyage, crossing the Pacific, rounding Cape Horn, and heading north toward familiar waters. But she never arrived. And now, 17 years later, she floated like a mausoleum on water, hidden in a desolate stretch of the Antarctic where no trade ships passed, where rescue never came, where no one would even think to look. The crew of the Hope boarded her with caution, step by step, breath held tight. What they saw inside has haunted maritime lore ever since. Everything on the Jenny was intact, as if frozen in the middle of life itself. Plates and cutlery still lay on tables, dusted with snow. A journal sat open in the navigator's quarters, its ink perfectly legible, the pages untouched by decay. The sails, though shredded, had not fallen. The ropes were stiff but unbroken. Even the ship's bell still hung, a silent sentinel over the dead. And the crew. They were all there. preserved in ice. Not rotted. Not scattered. But sitting, waiting. One sailor was found below deck, seated at a crate, arms folded across his chest as if asleep. Another stood near the helm, eyes still open, staring forever into the frozen fog. The cook had collapsed beside the stove, pots and pans still near his feet, a knife stuck halfway through a block of frozen meat. And in the captain's quarters, the heart of the mystery, sat the man in charge. He was upright at his desk, a blanket draped over his shoulders. One hand still gripped a quill. The other rested beside the ship's logbook. His face was calm. His eyes closed. There was no sign of struggle, only surrender. The last journal entry was short. Chilling. May 4th, 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive. Those 12 words sealed the Jenny's fate. The crew had starved. One by one, they must have perished, each choosing to remain aboard rather than risk the fury of the Antarctic Sea. The captain, the final soul left alive, recorded his end with the dignity of a man who knew no help would come. But the ice, it kept everything. How had the ship remained intact for 17 years? How had the journal survived? How had no predator, natural or human, disturbed this frozen graveyard? No pirates. No storms. No shipwreck. Only silence and time. And silence can be its own kind of terror. The crew of the Hope took only the logbook. No bodies. No cargo. They shut the doors behind them and sailed away, leaving the Jenny to drift back into the void. And the Jenny was never seen again. Some historians dismiss the tale as a fabrication, a bit of sailor folklore, stitched together from boredom and booze. There are no concrete shipping records, no photographs, no official documentation. Others argue that such preservation is impossible, that the sea would have torn the vessel apart within a decade. But that hasn't stopped the story from surviving. Because there's something too precise in the details. Something that feels real. A story born not from fantasy, but from the kind of horror that comes slowly. Quietly. The horror of isolation. The horror of waiting. And the idea that in the coldest places on Earth, death doesn't rot, it just pauses. Perhaps the Jenny still floats somewhere, locked in the embrace of the ice. Maybe the sea released her once, only to reclaim her again. Or maybe, just maybe, some ghost ships don't drift at all. They wait. For another crew to find them. For another hand to reach out. For the story to begin again. And in the frozen silence of the Antarctic, no one can hear you scream. In the high latitudes of the Arctic Circle, where maps blur into white and compasses spin in protest, the sea doesn't bury things. It preserves them. The winter of 1931 came early. Wind tore through the northern coast of Alaska, screaming across the Beaufort Sea like something alive. Snow didn't fall, it hunted. And ice spread over the water like glass cracking across a frozen window. By October, entire bays were choking in it. That's when the SS Bachimo disappeared for the first time. She was a steel-hulled cargo ship, 230 feet long, owned by the Hudson's Bay Company. For years, she ferried fur and goods between remote Arctic outposts and the rest of the world. She had weathered storms, brushed against the bones of glaciers. But in October 1931, while loading cargo near Point Barrow, the ice came faster than expected. She was trapped, sealed in place like a coffin nailed shut. The 14-man crew evacuated temporarily, setting up camp a few miles away to wait out the worst of it. But a sudden blizzard rolled in. For 2 days, whiteout conditions erased everything. And when it cleared, the ship was gone. Not sunk. Not broken. Gone. They assumed she'd been crushed, and pulled beneath the ice shelf. Grieved her. Reported her lost. But a few days later, a hunter spotted her drifting 45 miles away, perfectly upright, sailing slowly through broken ice. The crew caught up to her, salvaged what they could, but the weather worsened again. With temperatures dropping fast and supplies low, they made a hard decision. Leave her. They believed she'd sink soon anyway. But the SS Bachimo would not sink. She wouldn't freeze. She wouldn't stop. Instead, she kept going. Over the next 38 years, she was seen dozens of times, always alone, always adrift, always unmanned. Inuit hunters would spot her on the horizon, her black hull cutting silently across silver waves. Explorers would find her grounded in ice, climb aboard, only to be driven away by sudden storms. A boarding party in 1939 found her still holding cargo, untouched. They reported cold air pockets, the sound of shifting metal, and something they wouldn't talk about afterward. Locals began to fear her. They said she sailed where no crew could steer her. That when men approached her alone, they heard voices. That some who tried to tow her back never returned. She became a myth inside a truth. The ghost ship of the Arctic. In 1955, a crew of whalers claimed they saw her in open water, far from where ice should allow any ship to roam. In 1962, she was sighted again, drifting through pack ice like she belonged to it. Each time someone got close, something went wrong. Tow cables snapped. Weather changed. Men went silent. Some believed the ship was cursed. Others claimed she wasn't a ghost at all, but a warning, a vessel punished for trespassing too deep into waters that don't belong to man. One story said the ship had taken on an invisible captain, someone, or something, that now guided her from inside. That her course wasn't random. That she moved in circles, patterns carved into the Arctic as if tracing a ritual no one remembered. And then came 1969. A man named Captain Hugh Poulsen spotted her again near Point Barrow, the place she first vanished. Still floating. Still intact. Still silent. That was the last confirmed sighting. Since then, the SS Bachimo has never been found. She didn't rot. She didn't sink. She just disappeared. Search missions have scanned the Arctic for decades. No wreck. No trace. No steel bones sticking up through the ice. Some believe she finally sank beneath the pressure of 100 winters. Others say she made it through. Still out there. Still floating. And in some villages along Alaska's northern edge, the elders still warn children not to stray too far out on the water when the fog sets in. Because out there, beyond the snow and ice, there's a ship with no crew. A ship that doesn't sleep. That doesn't rust. That doesn't stop. A ship that's waiting. If you see her, they say, don't call out. Don't wave. Don't board. Because the Bachimo doesn't want help. She wants company. Maybe she's nothing but a steel husk blown by wind and current. Or maybe she remembers. The cold. The crew that left her. The decades she spent drifting, unseen, untouched, unloved. Maybe she's not lost. Maybe she just doesn't want to be found. And in the vast, silent white of the north, where time doesn't pass the same and the sea keeps its secrets, the Bachimo still sails, just behind the mist, just beyond the reach of sonar. Uncrewed. Unclaimed. Unfinished. Because some ships die. Others are buried. But a few refuse to stop sailing. If you enjoy those stories, subscribe, comments with your theory, and join us as we dive even deeper in this next video.